This is The Persuasion Game, the Forge's podcast all about the art of persuasion. Each episode, we connect with marketers, business leaders and beyond to learn how they use persuasion to influence their customers, convince their stakeholders and drive their businesses forward. Good morning, Laura.
How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you today?
I'm excellent, thanks, Adam. I have a question for you. When was the last time you saw an ad and it prompted you to buy something? And what was it? That's
really interesting. So the last time I bought something directly because of an advert was actually something I saw on Instagram. And you know when you've clicked on an ad at Instagram and then it continually sort of follows you around the internet for a bit? I think what you're seeing there is the kind of rise of digital advertising and the ability to kind of put something in front of someone and then sort of almost pester them until they kind of convert and buy that product.
Very much the 7-year-old's approach to making you buy something.
Exactly, the pester power, yeah. Which I think is very different to how advertising, has been previously.
Exactly. I mean, it's actually quite hard to think of the last time you saw like a really iconic ad that made you think, wow, this brand is so powerful, conversations are happening around it, there's a huge amount of sort of cultural momentum. And I think that's going to be really pertinent to the conversation that I'm flying solo on today. We are going to be talking about the evolutions in platforms and what that's actually meant for advertising for good and for, frankly, some areas for optimization. So it's going to be a bit of a call to arms as well as a reflection on some of the changes that we have to adapt to.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing the interview and catching up with you after.
Thank you. Today on The Persuasion Game, we're joined by two highly respected figures in the world of marketing and media. Nick Manning, co-founder of the pioneering Manning Gottlieb, has played a key role in shaping modern media planning and strategy. And joining Nick is Caroline Marshall, the former editor of Campaign and an expert in the trends, challenges and opportunities shaping the creative industries. Together, they're here to discuss their new project, Advertising Who Cares, a seminal exploration of why advertising seems to be losing its relevance and a call to arms about what to do about it. Welcome to you both.
Well, thanks for having us.
Nick, let's just start with a quick reflection on the state of the industry today. It's absolutely enormous, isn't it?
Well, for the first time last year, it became a $1 trillion industry, which is a real milestone, and it's grown dramatically over the last few years.
What's been driving that growth?
Largely the direct-to-consumer market, e-commerce, social search, things like retail media networks, Amazon growing massively, other people entering the market, so Walmart, even Uber, some of the financial companies like Chase. So there are a lot of new advertisers, and advertising has become their lifeblood. So if you're a direct-to-consumer brand, it's what you use to build your brand and it's what you use to sell your product.
We were reflecting on how instinctive that relationship is now between the sort of nudge and the purchase with so many of those channels. It used to be sort of you'd reflect on something and maybe think about it, go to a store, and now it's like, oops, I've actually bought 3 things I saw on Instagram the other day.
Well, yeah, immediacy has become a major factor in all of this, and there's been a big trend towards trying to drive an immediate sale, whereas obviously in prior times it was about planting brand seeds and waiting for them to grow, and now it's very much led by more short-term considerations. But it's brought a whole new generation of advertisers into the advertising market, many of them small to medium-sized businesses. So just to put that into context, Facebook have got well over 10 million advertising customers, including the big brands, but we've got an enormous, great big long tail of some are mom-and-pop businesses, some smaller, some brands and businesses have been built entirely on social and search. In some ways, the advertising market has divided between the more traditional brand-led side of life and the new brands and businesses that have been built by online channels.
That's interesting because that's often the defense that these platforms will use when they feel like they're under attack and say, we have so many businesses that rely on us as the main channel and, we support small businesses, things will collapse without us. You've described it in the past as creating a more diverse and less homogenous landscape, and that affects big brands too, doesn't it?
Well, brands have had to sort of go into the new channels to probably a disproportionate extent because that's where they see that the public has gone. And they have. I mean, the average dwell time on TikTok these days is an hour a day. And people are, especially obviously at the younger end, people are on their devices all day, every day, flicking between different, apps and other platforms. And that's part of the problem, is because the audience has become extremely elusive. They don't dwell for long at any given moment in time. So the actual usage might be an hour a day, but the average session might be only, a few seconds up to a minute. So trying to catch audiences in that environment is very hard. So that's why the attention industry has grown up, because it is now trying to arrest attention. The Ofcom report from last year looked at where people are getting their news from now, and it's roughly split 50-50 between online platforms and more mainstream platforms. We've passed a stage now where people are tending to get more of their news from online sources than from the more traditional sources, which is quite another milestone, I think.
And that's only going to be exacerbated with this news that there's not going to be sort of checks and regulations on information.
It can reinforce prejudices and all sorts of other things as well. So it's important to have news sources which are analytical, fact-based, and believe in the truth. And unfortunately, those are the ones which are on the run at the moment. And Elon Musk himself said the MSM, or mainstream media, is all propaganda. And he really believes it. He believes that the only truth lies with the people.
Individuals.
Vox populi, as he says. So he's not, and the problem there is that people don't necessarily trust online channels. So again, the Ofcom report said 50% of people are getting their news from online channels, but the level of trust in that was far lower than it is for the more established channels. Admittedly, in the UK, we have to be careful here because the US is another world. And it really is another world because they don't have public service broadcasting, and some of the TV channels like Fox News on one dimension, but CNN on the other, make no bones about what their point of view is.
Just going back to that point about attention, Caroline, I mean, you presided over a campaign in kind of a golden age of brands really setting the culture. I certainly remember, Levi's, for example, being one brand where you thought, wow, if that ad comes out, the song's going to be number one, everyone's going to be wearing the jeans, the star of it is going to be famous. Tell us a little bit about what that sort of cultural impact piece and how you've seen it shifting.
Well, I think things have changed enormously, if you said. I don't mean to suggest that everything was great once and not so good now, but I think one of the things that's happened to us as human beings is that the time we're prepared to spend on anything, on advertising as one of those things, but on pretty much any activity that requires our cognitive facilities, is less because we're bombarded with so much stuff. So all analysis around advertising points to the ever more important role of grabbing attention. I think the work of Tom Roach has found that we have on average 2.5 seconds to grab people's attention. Very short. And this, of course, points to the really important role of storytelling and emotion and all those kind of softer aspects of grabbing attention. And the reality is that a lot of new advertising these days doesn't really rely on that too much. It relies on bombarding us with short and less memorable messages.
Yeah, hard to tell a story in 2.5 seconds.
It is. It's possible, but it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gary Vaynerchuk said last year, the creative brief should say, you need to make the impact that you're planning to make in the first 2 seconds of any communication, because that's all you're going to get. And you're going, took me more than 2 seconds to read that. And you got my attention in the end.
A bit quicker, Gary. Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. And he's sort of saying basically the creative brief should now be written for a 2-second execution, which is clearly ludicrous.
And obviously there's going to be some impacts for the ad industry. I suppose if, as a former brand person, it could be tempting for someone like me to go, well, isn't that an ad agency problem? That's the new environment that you've got to work with. But I think the point that you're making with advertising, who cares, is this is a massive brand problem as well. This is a shared problem for brand owners too. Yeah. What do you think some of the key decisions or some of the tensions that are emerging are from this new landscape?
Well, advertising, who cares, is about all sorts of things, but the main thing it's about is addressing the imbalance in the marketing and advertising industry, which used to be led by the advertisers, and everybody else basically worked in the interests of the advertisers. What's happened, so it was a demand-led industry. What's happened over time is now become a supply-led industry, largely through the dominance of the big digital channels. And they pretty much hold all the cards now. And as a result, everybody's kind of had to fall in line behind that. And people say, well, the big channels are attracting the attention of the consumer now. More broadly speaking, what's happened is that we've gone from being led by creativity, as we were before, to being led by media execution. So that's an imbalance. And so there's two imbalances here. There's away from the clients towards the supply side and towards media channels having primacy over the creative messaging. So we're trying to get some more balance back in the system.
One of the things that really stood out to me in Advertising Who Cares, which we're about to explain in detail, was you talked about the shine coming off advertising. And I thought that was such a lovely way of illuminating it, because it's not that it's not still robust, it's not that it's not still really important, but that kind of spark of inspiration feels like it's not there. And what we were reflecting on was private label, and the growth of private label has been a massive conversation with so many of the clients we work with. I guess the question a lot of people will be asking is, why should we buy this brand? And it feels like that lovely lever of something really aspirational and exciting has perhaps lost a bit of its luster. Do you think that's fair, Caroline?
Certainly for some brands, that's true. But I believe in the truth of a statement that Jeremy Bullmore, the great advertising philosopher, once wrote, which is about how people build brands. And he talks very brilliantly about people building brands from, like a bird builds a nest, from straws and scraps. Say that quickly. that they come across in their life, in their working life, in their domestic life, all over the place, and that they build these things sort of slowly and deliberately over time. And that, I suppose, will never change. That's a truth about brands that allows them to be both valuable in a boardroom and valuable in somebody's life, as something they can rely on and trust without wanting to overstate the value of loo roll and cheese in our lives. But yeah.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, often what you see is that businesses are actually indexing better than governments or other institutions in terms of trust. And perhaps there's a certain sense of, well, you have to do that or I won't buy you. So there's a little bit of a sort of hygiene factor.
Well, there's also the aspect of justifying a premium, because obviously, branded goods are considerably more expensive than own label. And the way to justify that premium, because on a par basis, they probably perform the same, is to be a well-known brand. And this has been going on for decades. There's nothing new about all this. But there's been a shift really towards away from building brands towards a more immediate sell. And it's kind of exemplified by the Silicon Valley view of the world, which is it's all about eyeballs. Whereas, we would think in terms more of, yes, you've got your ads need to be seen and heard, but you need to drive engagement. You need to embed messages in the memory.
Brain cells, not
well,
eyeballs.
Absolutely. And it's helpful if you appeal to the heart as well as the head, because that's the way that brands get built long term. But the whole industry has moved to a short-term basis, and it's all about getting your brand or your product in front of the audience in the most efficient manner possible, not necessarily effective at all. So there's been a massive shift, and so we've now got a industry divided in two between the more brand-led side and the side that's just trying to get a quick fix, as it were. And the American approach to advertising has always been a bit more, along those lines. I mean, if you ever watched any American television, even going back decades, you'd have the credits for the program, and then the ads would roll. Then you have about 3 minutes of content, and the ads would roll. They've always been about trying to capture the audience almost unawares, whereas we worked in a much more curated environment where there was a better relationship between the surrounding editorial, as it were, and advertising.
Yeah, that kind of pay to play almost from the audience, rather than actually trying to sort of engage them and tell a story that brings them in. It's very much like push narrative.
Their approach has always been much more let's interrupt the consumer.
Yes.
Now I saw a presentation from Google only in December at a conference, and they said, we've got this fabulous new product where you can actually watch the action on the football field on the left side of the screen, and there's ads running on the right. and actually, while this guy is going to
And then you can call your therapist about the nervous breakdown you're having at the same time.
and just before the guy's going to do the touchdown, we switch to an ad, and I'm exaggerating for effect here, and I'm not being disrespectful towards the US in this respect, but it is just a fact of life. Is that the British approach to, and not just British, but European and other, throughout the rest of the world, it's been a bit more balanced. So if you go back to public service broadcasting and even ITV, they're all regulated to control the amount of advertising you can have, and also the duration of things, and conflict within breaks and all that. And that was how things worked for a long time, to protect the public from excessive advertising. And we've lost all of that. People are no longer protected from excessive advertising. In fact, they're subject to it.
I'm old enough to remember the relationship between the kettle going on and the ad breaks in Coronation Street. And, that kind of conversation now. Why? Why would that happen?
I mean, even then, so if you're writing an episode of Coronation Street, you would build in to your thinking the fact there's going to be a commercial break. So you would build to a plot line or something just before the ad break, to keep people in anticipation of what's going to happen later. Whereas in the US, it's kind of like, no, we're just going to insert an ad here. So if you watch YouTube, which we all do, ads pop up all over the place. I was watching a podcast, and it was Richard Osman and Marina Hyde talking. And Richard Osman was just halfway through a sentence. And literally this ad popped up for God knows what. And there was no attempt to put it into an ad break or pod or whatever. It just appeared suddenly. And it's kind of like...
Yeah, can't wait to get rid of it. Very interesting point you're making, because I was listening to, I think, the same podcast as you, and they were talking about the storytelling of people like Russell T. Davis, who started on Coronation Street. And as you say, that storytelling was about respecting a narrative structure that also included an ad break. So I think it's a great point you're making, that actually everyone has become more individualized and sort of, I've got to speak, and there's a lack of sort of flow for the actual audience. But we're here today to talk about the counter movement to that, which is advertising who cares. Should we start, Nick, perhaps by a little bit of an intro as to what it's actually all about?
Yes, it's about a number of things, but the main thing we're trying to do is to help advertisers primarily advertise better and more effectively, and also to help create a better advertising industry for the people who work in it. And we've got a number of strands to doing all of that. So we break it down really into things that would make advertising better, such like, getting back to some great creative ideas. What does great creative look like? How does it tell the stories that we want to tell? How does it engage people in a way that is going to be really effective? And what goes into that? But in today's context, we're not trying to turn back the clock and say, suddenly we should all put our money back in ITV. All of this takes into account where we are today and what's going on around us. So it's designed for today and tomorrow, not retrospectively. We also look at how those messages get delivered to people in the most effective way possible, and effectiveness should be at the front and centre of that. But we also believe in some slightly more basic things, which is that we want to get back to a situation where advertising money funds high quality media content, and not just news. There's been a lot of discussion about that, which is absolutely true. But it's not just about news. It's about great comedy, great entertainment, great documentaries. It's all about the ecosystem of the media industry. And the sad fact is that the people who spend the most money on good content have been deprived of advertising revenue as it has flown to the platforms who do not make any content at all. So 70% of the money of the growth in the industry over the last 10 years, according to Walk, has gone to Alphabet properties, so essentially Google, the Meta properties, so obviously Facebook and Instagram, and Amazon. And you've got TikTok on top of that, and so on. And none of those companies make anything. They take content from the public and they represent it back for advertising. And as a result, the companies who struggle most against that are the ones who are being underfunded, the ones who are investing in high quality drama, for example, which has become almost, so there was this virtuous circle of advertising money funding content where advertising worked harder. And we've moved away from that, and we're trying to sort of get a better balance right. So going back to what I was saying earlier on about balancing, the industry has shifted too much towards the sell side, the supply side. Too much money has gone into the platforms that don't provide a great environment for advertising, frankly, not to mention the fact that 50% of all web traffic is artificial. So clients don't even know half the time.
50%?
50% of web traffic bought by advertisers may not even be real. And we say things like that because we want people to sit up and pay attention, because it is true and always has been. We've had massive issues of artificial traffic, ad fraud, advertising doesn't get seen by people. So, all of these things have been talked about for a long time, but they haven't broken through the consciousness of advertisers.
These sound like huge problems as you describe them, don't they? I almost feel like packing up and going home and not trying to do anything. It's just too difficult. But the thing about any big change or big problem is that the tension between the personal and the collective, isn't it? What can we as individuals in our industry do? The problem is so big that I, as an individual, my company or my sector may find it almost impossible to deal with. So I think the thing about Who Cares was you and your co-founder, Brian Jacobs, standing up and saying, yes, the problem is big, but we all have to stand up and do something about it. And that was, for me, I remember reading the story of you and Brian putting it together and launching it when it appeared in the trade press. And the first thing I did was, write an email to Nick, who I'd known as a journalist on Campaign, and the subject line was, I am Spartacus. And it was my moment that was standing up and saying, whatever skills I've got, I really want to help you do this.
And you put a lot of energy into the launch last year, right, Caroline?
We did, yes. It launched as an event on September the 12th last year at London's Royal Society of Arts, through zero advertising budget, but loads of PR and loads of shoe leather on behalf of everybody involved. We got 200 people, roughly, to pay enough money to cover the costs for the venue for the day, to come and hear some 12 to 15 speakers talk around 5 strands, which Nick and Brian identified as the kind of 5 areas around which all the thinking would coalesce.
And who were the people? Who were the type of people that were joining you at that session?
Well, it was a real combination of people who, my sense in the room on the day was, I'm going to go and have a look at these people. Are you a threat to my business? Or are you an opportunity? And it was an interesting, very optimistic mood in the room, but I felt that people were really checking us out on that day. And at that time, I think we had a supporter base of some 250, 300 people by the time of the launch. It's now heading for 600, isn't it?
Yep.
So you sort of draw your conclusions from that.
Yeah, fabulous.
If anything, the room was people who do remember how things used to be. It was heavily skewed, of course it would be, towards those kind of people. So our challenge going forwards is definitely to reach younger generation people and the future leaders, of our industry, so that they have a sense of how good and exciting a place the industry could be to work in, and how wonderfully effective advertising could be, and how journalism could be funded in a more fair and helpful way to society.
And I think one of the points that you land really well in advertising Who Cares is it's actually a brand, people that work at brand's job to be as involved in this conversation, that there's a lot of conversations about being a responsible brand, being a brand that people can trust, being a sustainable brand. Can you talk a little bit about how this current environment is perhaps not helping brands deliver that?
Well, it's partly aimed at the advertisers because they need to be armed with the best possible guidance as to how to advertise well. By that we mean advertise effectively, but also in a responsible way. And responsibility covers many bases, even down to sustainability and so on. But it's also making sure that your advertising money that you invest is going to the right places and is doing the right job. So going back to your point about crowdsourcing, because in the end, this is a big crowdsourcing exercise. When we first put our first blog out, we had no idea whether we would be supported by people or not. And we found, to our pleasure and delight, that they did. So we're now going out on a big crowdsourcing exercise to find the best thinking on all aspects of advertising and the advertising industry. So we're going to be actively talking to people, approaching the people who are doing great work in all of these areas, including people like Cannes and the Effie's, to Walk, to System One, to Burnett and Field. All these people are doing great work. The same is true in media as well, in so many other areas. But a lot of that great thinking and work is in silos and is not understood and appreciated by the advertiser community in particular, despite the best efforts of the trade associations who do what they do, and they do it well. But it's not in one place. So what we're going to be doing is providing a central source of all of the best thinking across 9 different areas of the advertising industry that we believe need to be reshaped to the and brought to the attention of advertisers. It's a grassroots movement that's trying to influence what goes on within the advertising industry, and we're doing it on a purely voluntary basis.
This is amazing.
Everybody is donating their time free of charge. We also take no sponsorship, because as soon as you do that, you start to introduce an element of commerciality, which we can't have. So we are trying to get the wisdom of the crowds to advise people on what the best of advertising can look like. And that way we get a better balance back into the industry, we hope. And in that, we have the support of the advertiser associations, the Advertising Association, and others have all said, yep, good on you guys. We're doing a lot of this already, but great. If you can help amplify our messages, we're very much behind it.
I love the idea of it being crowd-powered but can't be bought. It's kind of feels really powerful, doesn't it?
And also it's voluntary. So everybody who's doing it may, at the back of their mind, think, I wonder if there's anything in this for me, as it were. But actually, everybody's doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. Everybody has been on our side. Why wouldn't they be? Who wants worse advertising? And who wants a worse advertising industry? So everybody believes that things can be improved on both dimensions. And we've had, as Caroline was saying, got up to about 600 official supporters, but that's all been incoming and organic. Now we're actually actively going to the marketplace and inviting people to join.
One thing that's really stood out is it feels like it's bringing a bit of love and pride back to the industry, which is, so welcome, and not just sort of you're doing this wrong, but actually how can we inspire and galvanize and, as you say, share inspiration from an increasingly siloed world. There are 9 areas. We are a short podcast, so I wanted to just focus on 2 that I think our audience will find particularly interesting. And Caroline, can you talk to me a little bit about the creativity strand of this initiative?
Yes, absolutely. That's the one that I will be heading and assembling a crack team of advertising thinkers and doers to work on, which is really exciting. One thing that one of our speakers spoke about in September really struck me when it came to everything that's underpinning this strand. And it was Michael Farmer, who's a Madison Avenue-based business consultant. One of the sort of slightly horrifying stats that he brought to bear was that in 2010, an average creative team was perhaps working on 110, roughly, deliverables per year. And by 2019, it was well over 300.
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference, isn't it? And therefore, quality isn't going to be the same.
People are pouring from an empty cup, probably.
Yeah. So I suppose what the big goal for us is to put in one place really thoughtful thinking, whether that constitutes podcasts, writing, speeches, examples of work, case studies, that constitutes good, i.e. original and effective creative thinking for today's environment. So where a place that we can learn about the best in planning, the best in insight, the best in strategy, and also in brief generation as well. Our trade bodies, our industry bodies, Nick's right, they have been, banging the drum for some time about all of these issues, but the jigsaw isn't really complete in any one place. So we are hoping to assemble that jigsaw and move it towards completion in terms of resource that people can access for free. Most training isn't free in our industry.
So it's also worth saying that there's a lot of good work going on in the world of creativity, a lot of good work going in media, a lot of good work going in people-related matters and others, but they tend to talk to their own community. So the creative stuff that's been coming out last year about consistency out of the IPA Advertising Effectiveness Awards, all those kind of things, gets noticed most by the creative side of the industry, but not by advertisers and not by other people. So the point that Caroline's making about the jigsaw is very important.
Yes.
All of these things are interrelated. They all stem from the same business, well, a number of different business models. But you have to put the whole picture together to understand it. And most advertisers don't have the time to look at that for themselves, so we're trying to do it for them. The other aspect that's changed is that we used to have campaigns, and we'd spend weeks thinking about the campaign, and you'd build up to it. You'd have time to think and time to plan. Now, because advertisers need to be always on, they're managing their social channels and their other digital channels day in, day out, with endless permutations of content and channel and data. There's no time to think anymore, because it's constant plate spinning with no run up to it. You might be developing campaigns at the same time, but you've got to keep the thing going. So nobody has any time anymore, and they're all stretched. And the same is true for agencies as well. I mean, the one thing we hear consistently from clients is my advertising agency or my media agency, or whatever agency, don't seem to be able to manage the workloads. Now, part of that is to do with how they're paid, but it's just day in, day out, and it's relentless. So the thinking time, the planning time is reduced.
So that actually leads quite nicely, Nick, into the point that you were making about another strand of work, which is really about the motivation of people in the advertising industry. I think it's a truth that everyone's acknowledging, that young people are not finding this an aspirational career anymore. Can we speak a bit about that?
What we're trying to do is say, how can we provide employment and enjoyment? Because in the end, people want to come into work. They want to do great work. Nobody comes in thinking, I'm going to do a really shit job today. We want people to want to work in advertising and want to contribute to the future of advertising and do it better. And at our launch event that Caroline talked about, we had a presentation from Crispin Reed, who'd done a lot of work, research into young people's attitudes towards advertising and the advertising industry. And we had quotes like, why would I want to join an industry that bombards us with crap all day long? We also have a problem with low motivation within the workforce now. We have issues of mental health and other things as well. Salaries have stagnated in the last 17 years. So we want to create an environment where advertising becomes, again, an attractive industry for the people who are in it now, but also for the people to come. That's a big job because we're starting from not a great position, really. But we need to do it, because otherwise the brain drain will continue, and we won't attract the people that we need, whether they're school leavers or graduates or whatever. So that's a big part of this. But there's one other aspect which I'm going to cheat here by telling you about one other work stream, which is industry relationships. We want to foster a much greater sense of collegiality and collaboration between the different entities within the advertising industry. That used to be the case because everybody was working on behalf of the same end user, the advertiser. We've lost that as well. So we want to get back to a situation where everybody's pulling in the same direction as much as they can within commercial constraints, and trying to do the best job they can to make advertising more effective for the people who need it to be effective, and obviously to make a better industry for people as well. So these are all big, hairy, audacious goals, but we think they're absolutely in need of being addressed, and we once we've done all of this, we will make the outputs available to everybody for free on a website and in podcasts, and in maybe we'll come back and do another one of these.
Yes, please.
Presentations and so on. And we can see this working quite well within the academic environment, where we go into schools and colleges and universities and do a presentation and say, when you're considering careers, these are the reasons why you should consider advertising. We then need that to be followed up with real action by the people who employ people. But when people say, what is your end goal look like? The end goal really is that we have a much healthier, happier industry producing much more effective work. And the way to do that is to arm people with the information they need to help that come about.
Fabulous. And what do you think, if we think again of our audience, if we thought of a person that working in a brand today, what would you like to see from them in terms of supporting you in next steps?
I guess for me it would be really insisting that we need to all develop a focus on how something works, not that it does alone. As simple as that, really. Because that leads us to all sorts of debates beyond the product itself, but all the surrounding category, context, culture, setting, user, media, all that really interesting stuff. It's not enough just to say that something works. You need to really understand and dig down under the bonnet.
If that's what it feels like, very deep and like a holistic view, and as you say, more balanced, more of an ecosystem rather than lots of individual strands.
Yes, Caroline's absolutely right. That's exactly what we need to do. And we start really by explaining why the world works the way it does. So our business model strand says, let's talk about the world as it is now and will be, as opposed to the world we'd like it to be. So everything that we're doing is within the context of where we are. We're not going to suddenly turn back to an era when the platforms aren't very powerful. Saying, well, we know where we are. We don't need to discuss it anymore. How do we address it? How do we arm advertisers in particular with the tools they need? You should be able to go onto our resources and say, when I'm thinking about creativity, how should I be thinking about it? How about comms planning? How about trade and trust and transparency? How about measurement and accountability? So they will be able to go into our resources and say, this is good advice. Then who they choose to execute against that is entirely up to them. Yeah. It's not us. But we're going to provide them with the tools of the job.
That's fantastic. And where can people find out more about Advertising Who Cares?
Well, initially, the place to go is www.advertisingwhocares.org, where you can find out all about this. You can read the manifestos, you can see what we're doing, and you can sign up to become a supporter. And we're toying with other things like giving supporters first dibs on the conference and stuff like that. But yes, that's the place to start. But and really, the other thing that people should do if they're interested is go and look at the videos of our launch event, particularly Lucy Jameson from Uncommon, for example, about creativity, Jenny Bigham on trading trust and transparency, Michael Farmer on business models, and so on and so forth.
We will make sure we put links to those in the show notes. Nick and Caroline, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, what did you think?
Well, I love listening to that. That was so interesting. I've been following, the Ad Contrarian and various others on the sort of blogosphere for a while, talking about these issues. But Nick has managed to kind of pull them together in one campaign, which it sounds like is gaining some serious momentum.
A really robust campaign as well. It's interesting. We were reflecting, weren't we, that when you looked at the recent US inauguration, the seating plan tells you a lot. Front row seats for all of the tech giants, and that just confirms that this reality of like a consolidation of power into these platforms is just not going to change.
Exactly, and all of the brands that we work with, that our listeners work with, I mean, they have a role to play in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
The decisions that they're making are contributing to this reality, and I think it's really important that we are conscious of these different kind of power dynamics and how things are changing
and how you manage them and still build an effective and responsible brand.
Absolutely, yeah.
See you next week.
See you next week. Thanks for listening. If you'd love to hear more from marketers, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about how to use the art of persuasion to drive your business forward, then make sure you're following the podcast in your favourite podcast app. And just a last ask from us. This is a new podcast, and we'd love it if you could be persuaded to help us spread the word by telling somebody else about it, leaving us a review, or even better, sharing an episode on social media. Search The Forge on LinkedIn.